Help MythVision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Join the Patreon to get early access to videos and check out the website.
Go ahead, get the book. Come on, subscribe to his podcast.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert, Early Mormonism, Joseph Smith, and some of the not only craziest things I've ever heard, but some of the most emotional descriptions of some type of cult leader leading his people into a theocracy, so to speak, that is causing people to literally kill one another. This is an intense story given by Bryce Blankenagle and David Fitzgerald. We'll start with them. And first off, I want to say David Fitzgerald, he's the author of The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion and the Mormons. Make sure you guys go down in the description, get it on ebook, get it on hard copy. Go check out his Patreon. He just opened up and started. You guys can help support what these gentlemen do. And Bryce Blankenagle also has a Patreon. He is the host of Naked Mormonism podcast. And both of these guys go into a lot more description than what we're going to hear on this show. I'm learning with you guys. I've never heard this material. I've known Mormon missionaries that walk to my door. They really mean well. I know they're sincere. They're great people. Some of the most family-oriented people I've ever met. They're just such lovable people. But the origins of this entire cult and where it comes from, you're never going to hear anything like this except for these two gentlemen. So with that, thank you guys for joining me today on MythVision Podcast. I can't wait to, hear what you have to say. There was a serious battle. A 9-year-old is killed. Gruesome graphics come into my mind looking and imagining what this must have been like. And there's no telling where we're going from here. So I'm going to stay silent and learn. Thank you.
I guess I want to start this conversation jumping off of what you said there, Derek. This is material that most Mormons will never, ever learn about their entire life. A very small group of historians, some who work for the church, some who work for church institutions like BYU, some who are independent researchers, whatever the case may be. They understand all of this. They understand the real humanity behind what we're discussing and what really transpired here and where the faults lie, where the conflicts exist, who is responsible for what. And they retain belief in these in the church and retain full faithful membership in the church, which proves to me that people are capable of understanding this history and still being members of the church. But the fact that the church does not ever teach any of this to the membership, and that the only church history that most members know is that Joseph Smith was a prophet. He had a vision. He translated the golden plates into the Book of Mormon, and then he was martyred. That is a massive disservice and an infantilization of these people. It is not trusting these people to come to their own conclusions and their own understanding with having this information. And I think that that is a disservice to the people who are members of the institution, as well as the institution itself. And my work on Naked Mormonism and in venues like this, where I am graciously invited to discuss Mormon history, is to try and expand that scope, to try and bring more people into an understanding of Mormon history, because I think that there is a plethora of rich and fascinating stories within this timeline that we can take some real human lessons from that extend far beyond beyond religious tenets and theology. And I think it's very important to understand those tensions and to understand what lessons are truly pregnant throughout the saga of Joseph Smith's Mormonism.
I want to say before we get started, and this is fascinating. I mean, we're already beginning here, but into the history again. Your knowledge on this is invaluable. You really have a grasp on this. Me and David were talking about this off air. Like no one I know. This is a passionate thing, and I know this is very emotional for you, especially coming from this. I mean, there's always a special place in our heart for those who are where we were. I'm a recovering addict. I look at addicts with sympathy, empathy, and I understand that it's an illness. They're not bad people necessarily. They have if you will, blinders on. They don't understand the cycle they're in. And the same goes for those those young children who are indoctrinated at a young age. Great children. Some of the greatest people I've ever met are Mormons, and they don't even know where this comes from. So this is great information, and I really value you and David Fitzgerald's information and knowledge. You've got all these details, and David, he's gonna pop out the things and be humorous about it, like he should do stand-up, really. But I
Agreed.
I love you guys, man, and I really appreciate everything you guys bring. I hope that everyone watching this will go down and support you guys in your endeavors. So with that, I will be silent.
Quick jump. Thank you for that. That's awesome.
Mormons are getting executed. The Mormon leadership, Joseph Smith, is set to be executed the next morning after Far West. The strong Mormon stronghold in Caldwell County has now surrendered. They waved the white flag. Joseph Smith, Alexander McCrae, Hiram Smith, George Hinkle, Parley Pratt, a number of the Mormon leadership are now in the state's custody, set to be executed by a court-martial. Now, we can discuss the merits and the usefulness of court-martials and the proper utility for court-martials here. And I think that conversation bears a little bit of discussion. But a court-martial was not the place where Joseph Smith should have been ruled to be executed, right? Because he was not a state-sanctioned militia officer. He had not committed treason as an approved of member of the state military. He created his own rebel militia and committed treason with it. So a court-martial is for internal investigations within the military. And if somebody is found to have committed treason or have gone AWOL or whatever the case is, a court-martial is the right place for that hearing to happen. And it's a tribunal. That's what Samuel Lucas, I believe it was General Samuel Lucas, held for Joseph Smith and the other leadership, and he sentenced them to execution because they had committed treason. Members of the state militia.
Go back one sentence, sorry.
General Lucas determined that these men were to be shot and executed for committing treason. Whether or not that should have been carried out is a large question, because these men were not actually members of the state militia, or if this should have been a citizen tribunal.
And the legal niceties of that are what saved his life in this case.
That is correct, as well as a Jack Mormon, General Donovan, right? So we have General Atchison, who had been commissioned as part of the militia force to surround Far West, and then when Governor Lilburn Boggs realized that General Atchison was more favorable to the Mormons, Governor Boggs disbanded Atchison's troops. He wanted Far West to be surrounded by anti-Mormons, not somebody with Mormon sympathies. So General Atchison went home because that was what his orders were by the executive of the state, Governor Boggs. General Donovan was not as much of let's say, a firebrand friend of the Mormons as General Atchison was, and General Donovan hadn't been holding Governor Boggs's feet to the fire the way that General Atchison had. So General Donovan, a Jack Mormon, friend of the Mormons, was there the night that Far West was surrounded and the Mormon leadership surrendered. So Samuel Lucas, this guy who executed the court-martial and determined the square of Far West the next morning, figured that it would be best if he had General Donovan carry out that military execution, because as a matter of spectacle, as a matter of optics, this court-martial was extrajudicial. He didn't actually have the legal authority to commit these men to be executed. But if he could get this Jack Mormon, General Donovan, to carry out his order and execute these guys in the square of Far West, then that would create a veneer of justification for it. So he said, you carry this out. General Lucas said to General Donovan, quote, "You will take Joseph Smith and the other prisoners into the public square of Far West and shoot them at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." General Donovan understood what was going on and understood that he was becoming a pawn of General Samuel Lucas. And he said, "It is cold-blooded murder. I will not obey your order. My brigade shall march for liberty tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And if you execute those men, I will hold you responsible before an earthly tribunal. So help me God." So there's infighting among the Missouri militia officers.
And I gotta say how extraordinary it is during this time, given what's already happened in Missouri, that there is a military officer who's willing to say, "No, we've gone too far. We have to keep it legal." Good on him. Good on him.
Yeah. General Donovan saved the lives of these men. He did that by disobeying this order, by literally going against his commanding officer, and by disobeying this order and instead taking his men against the orders of the governor and marching to Liberty to have a meeting with the other militia officers and generals there and to take their understanding to Governor Lilburn Boggs. By disobeying Governor Boggs and Samuel Lucas here, his two highest ranking commanding officers, he saved the lives of these men, and Samuel Lucas did not carry out the execution.
And here's another what if moment. This is just one more of those crazy ass moments where Mormonism could have been snuffed out just like that.
Right there. It's gone.
This was probably the last big great escape that Joseph Smith would pull out of his hat, in fact.
Yep, exactly.
And had it happened, I remember 133, I think. Let me see. Yeah, we would be missing 133 of the divine revelations he received over the next 4 years. And so much of what we think of as Mormonism would have been stillborn in the grave.
Yep. Yeah. Or it would have accelerated the schism crisis that we see play out in 1844. And who knows, because that has ramifications for not just Mormon history, not just American history, but world history. Joseph Smith is executed here. World history looks different than it does today.
It's weird to think about, isn't it? I can't wait till we get to the secession crisis, because that is fun, crazy fun.
Oh yeah. Well, and yeah, this is one of those butterfly effects, right? And we see this is the butterfly flapping or not flapping its wings that allowed Mormonism to be what it is today. So the Mormon leadership surrenders, and this is in Far West in Caldwell County. There's the twin Mormon city of Adamon-Diamond by Missouri militia, and
what did they do by Missouri militia? Because you just broke out.
Surrounded. They're surrounded by Missouri militia, right? So the twin Mormon cities are surrounded. They can't do anything. They can't go anywhere. They can't get provisions in and out. The towns are basically under siege. They had built up bulwarks around the city to try and set them up for defensive strategy, but they had begun those defensive procedures way too late and the cities were incredibly vulnerable. They didn't have the defenses necessary to actually stand up to a siege, especially if the siege was going to go out throughout the winter, because the Mormons didn't have enough provisions to survive the winter.
Let me just jump in here on that note. Thinking what must have been going through Joseph Smith's mind at this time, he must have thought, okay, we had a good run, but it is over, because
it's done. It's
done. We can't beat these guys. We don't have the food to get out the winter. We're getting kicked out into the cold, into the wilderness. And say what you will love about what you want about Joseph. I do have to give him props in this particular case that he said, I'm going to offer myself up as a sacrifice. Whether he really thought that was going to happen, or if he thought he was going to James T. Kirk his way out of it somehow, that's how he presented it. And
I gotta poke in here and ask, because I gotta ask Bryce, you're super skeptical, right? And you guys have different views, and you guys are different, right? You don't always agree on things, which is why you got to stay tuned, because there's going to be some stuff later on that you guys are going to be able to talk about. I can't wait for. Is that really the fact, David? And the reason why I ask is, could that be propaganda? Could that be Mormon, like he was self-sacrificing like our Lord, Jesus?
That's an excellent point, because we see plenty of that after the fact, for sure, especially when it comes to Carthage jail, as we'll get into.
I mean, if, like, for example, let's say the historical account is they got caught. Okay, well, ain't nothing we can do now. They play it and they mythologize it into he self-sacrificingly surrendered himself unto death. You know, like, hold on, dude. No, nice try. You guys were doing everything you could, and then you got caught and realized.
Well caught. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's a good point.
What do you think? Is that something you think, Bryce, or?
Yeah, no, you kind of said it perfectly, Derek. Like, they were totally out of options.
Yeah.
They were. This is the point where Joseph Smith becomes a victim of his own rhetoric, right? Because, and this happened back in science camp too. He had been preaching militarism. We are God's promised people. That is our promised land. We're going to restore the saints back to Zion. We're going to build Zion, the new Jerusalem on the American continent. He is preaching this militarism that we are going to, vex the nation with a sword of vexation. We're going to convert all of the Lamanites to Mormonism, to Christianity. He had been spouting this rhetoric for a long time. And at this point, when he surrenders without going down in a blaze of glory, like, that obviously shows how much Joseph Smith knew that his own stuff was bullshit, right? If he's truly the prophet of God, he is expecting Jesus himself to come riding in on a white horse and rescue the chosen people. But that didn't happen. Obviously, that didn't happen. If he believed his own rhetoric, if he believed the things that he was saying about the Mormon exceptionalism, this narrative, this persecution narrative, that they are the one true chosen people of God, the dude never surrenders.
Yeah.
But he does, right?
Yeah.
I think that reveals a lot about the inner machinations of Joseph Smith's mind, that he was far more of an opportunist and a user, as well as a bit utilitarian. If he can use somebody or something or an advantageous location, a place or provision or a resource, he's going to do that. And other people recognized that Joseph Smith was an opportunist, and they used that to their own advantage. Into hopefully what we're going to get into later today.
Yeah.
So Joseph Smith surrenders. The Mormon cities surrender. They telling the leadership at Adam-on-Diamond, we surrendered in Far West. You need to do the same. And they initially don't believe it, but then they're like, well, we're going to come in and ransack your town anyway, so it doesn't matter what you believe. And the Mormon leadership is carried off to Richmond, which is the southernmost county in this bulk of counties that we're talking about here, in Ray County. And the Mormon settlements are ransacked under the guise of, we're looking for weapons. They were looking for the any weapons the Mormons might have, as well as the arms and the cannon that the Mormons had stolen, which by this point the Mormons actually had buried the cannon to come pick it up and exhume it later and use it in whatever might come. They were looking for the state arms that the Mormons had stolen, as well as any arms that the Mormons might have. So they use that as the guise to go through both of the Mormon settlements, Far West Adam and Adam-on-Diamond, and ransack and burn their crops and shoot their hogs and cattle and horses and steal everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And of course, like, concomitant with this, like, this is also a time when, when a military force takes over a town, you don't want to be a woman in that, right? So we understand that of course there was ravaging going on as well. This is a very ugly and dark time in American history, and especially Mormon history. So the Mormon leadership is conveyed to Richmond, where they face a court of inquiry. This is a term that's not used in our current legal parlance. But it is essentially a grand jury trial where the state is collecting its enough, determine whether or not there's enough evidence to go with an actual jury trial, which is chaired by Justice Austin A. King. And if that name doesn't ring a bell to anybody, that I don't blame you, because I don't think I even said the guy's name when he came up earlier in the timeline. Austin A. King is the justice that the Mormons surrounded his house and forced him to sign a document under duress that he would basically show privilege to the Mormons. Austin A. King was the justice who chaired that court of inquiry. So obviously he's not an impartial judge in all of this.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, it's impossible to find somebody who's impartial in the entire state of Missouri.
But I mean, but maybe somebody who's slightly more impartial than somebody who got intimidated by 200 armed guys who surrounded his house.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong.
I mean, guys, they're caught. They are
well and truly caught.
And it is obvious that this guy, what evidence do you need? I mean, I am the guy, you circled my house, you threatened me,
right.
Whoa. I mean, you get a jury, they are caught red-handed, lock the key, throw away the key, whatever.
And
they're
that's
done.
what happens. They were locked away in prison for the rest of their lives, the ones that weren't shot, and that was the end of Mormonism.
That's right.
You would think. You would think.
Because that's how it's supposed to work. That's how the court system is supposed to work, right?
Exactly.
So this court of inquiry happens, and this is when Dr. Samson Avard, chairman of the Danites, turns state's witness, and he testifies about everything that went on with the Danites. He turns over the Danite manifesto that gave the dissenter, or gave the excommunicated guys, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, John Whitmer, William Phelps, 72 hours to leave town. He turns over a bunch of documents to the state, and they use it all in this court of inquiry. And once again, the court of inquiry was there to determine if the prosecution had enough evidence to move forward with a case for a jury trial. This is not a jury trial to get to a verdict and commit these guys to jail. This is just to determine if there's enough evidence to move forward, which this is a grand jury. It's a grand jury that we use today. Back then the term was a court of inquiry.
Gotcha.
So,
and there's serious charge, treason, arson, you name it.
Let's go through the exact charges. Treason, murder, arson, burglary, robbery, larceny, and perjury. 7 different charges that all of these guys are facing. And this is all in the conspiracy. It's all the leadership of Mormonism here. Upwards of like 60 guys are arrested and arraigned into this court of inquiry here, with the primary movers being Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, his older brother, Sidney Rigdon, Alexander McCrae, Lyman White, and
Harley Pratt. No.
Who was the guy?
It's all right. And others.
Caleb Baldwin. There we go. So these are the primary Mormon leaders who are Danites, who are in the church leadership, the church presidency. They're all arraigned in court as part of this court of inquiry. Samson Avard gives this damning testimony. The Mormons the defense is not allowed a witness in all of this, because this is just a grand jury. This is for the prosecution to present its evidence to determine if the state is going to move forward in an actual prosecution of a jury trial. So the Mormons are not allowed a defense in this, which fuels the persecution narrative, right? Because they see this as the court that sentenced them to jail, and they didn't even get a chance to make a defense, to mount a proper legal defense against this. Well, that was not the venue for the defense to take place, right? Notably, though, General Donovan, the guy who refused to carry out the orders and execute the guys in the city square of Far West, he was Joseph Smith's legal counsel. He was the legal counsel for the men in this court of inquiry. The court goes forward, and the men are all locked up in Missouri jails. I think in total 48 men are locked up in jails all over. And this is when once again, the names Joseph Smith, his older brother Hiram Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Lyman White, Caleb Baldwin, and Alexander McCrae are locked up in the ironically named Liberty Jail. And I actually have a few pictures of Liberty Jail. Let me pull them up really quick here. And because it today is a Mormon tourist attraction. Let me make sure this is correct. Because basically what this thing is now, the church purchased Liberty Jail, or the plot where Liberty Jail was. That's not what I'm looking for. My apologies, dear viewers. This is all from my tour around Liberty. Hey, you want to see me posing with a statue of Space Jesus?
Yeah,
There we
do.
go. All right. I got to find Liberty Jail.
Oh,
1 second. It's around here somewhere. Okay. No, I'm not going to find the picture I'm looking for. So this is a recreation of Liberty Jail, and the church has basically built a vault around this jail. It's a recreation of it. And you can see here what this jail looked like, what the size of it is, the general dimensions of it. And you can even see the figures down low. There we go. In the lower area, they have these wax figures of all 6 men who were interred in the jail. So this is the 2-story jail.
That's a really cool model, or not model, but real good reconstruction. I like.
Yeah, and this is owned by the church, and they have missionaries on staff at all times who lead tours of the Missouri. And they have these plaques around. It's a whole visitor center. The original key to the Liberty Jail here. And the prison temple. Joseph Smith is writing a bunch of revelations here. So this is the picture I was actually looking for originally.
He's basically Martin Luther King Jr. in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a multifaceted statement. So that's Liberty Jail, right? And that's the vault that the church has built around it, and they have missionary staff there all the time. When I went and toured this, go ahead, Derek.
I was gonna say, these guys are down here. You already got me thinking. So these guys are down here in this jail, all of them, and they're not necessarily on the same page. I mean, a couple of them were excommunicated from being in the position of power they were in, from what I understand.
Not these guys. These guys.
These were all on the same page. So let me ask you this: in light of that, what was said? I suspect they mythologized something about this jail scenario, and then they spoke, and the prophets said, is there something that was done during this jail visit we
have his letters?
We do. They are actually part of the church's revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants. It's sections 121 through 123. Joseph Smith. One thing that I love to see as a trend in Joseph Smith's timeline is when he is stuck, when he is unable to go anywhere, to do anything, to meet with people, the dude gets creative. And that comes into place with the Book of Mormon and writing it. That comes into play with the translating of the Bible. He's stuck inside for the winter. He and Sidney Rigdon are working away, plugging day after day after day away on that project. Most of his revelations are delivered in the winter time. His theological revelations are delivered in the winter time when he can't go out and travel to local Mormon settlements and preach. And when he is in Liberty Jail, he is opining, he's thinking, he's mulling over the situation that the Mormons had just been through, and he expounds on theology. His theologies develop whenever he is stuck. And I can pinpoint each time when there is a theological development in Mormon history, when that happened, it was at a time that Joseph Smith was stuck indoors. And Liberty Jail is one of those times.
Fun fact, we could also trace the acquisition of more wives to Joseph Smith through where he stayed in places. But that's a whole different other episode we have to get into.
Yeah, that is an important point though, because we have his letters that he basically sent as epistles to the Mormons at this time, but we also have his letters that were personal. And he sent a letter to his wife, Emma, of like, give the kids my love, be strong and everything. But also he was visited by somebody who would eventually become his wife. And the letter is like full of flourishes, and my heart was filled with your companionship. And, it's interesting to see the dichotomy of the letter he sent to his wife, Emma, and to the woman who he was courting, who visited him. This is also the very first time where Joseph Smith puts in writing gods instead of God. And he is like, you have to try and stick yourself in Joseph Smith's mindset, right? He says in this time, because he's suffering and he thinks that the jail guards try to feed him human flesh, and like there's a lot of really horrible stuff is going on here. He says, like, why have you forsaken us? God, why have you forsaken us? He is racked with torment. He doesn't know what to think, because all of his blustering, all of his rhetoric, all of his things that he thinks are, he's the prophet of God. He's speaking for God. If he has a thought in his mind, it's obviously comes from God. And no savior rode in to take down his enemies, to kill his persecutors. Nothing came in to save the Mormons. During this time, he's locked up from November to April, 1838 to 1839. The Mormons are being removed from Missouri, and they are forced from the state. Missouri, Governor Lilburn Boggs's executive order said, I don't care where you go, anywhere but here. And the Mormons didn't know where to go either. So they went north and east, the nearest place that they possibly could, to get out of the state of Missouri, because it was illegal for them to live in the state of Missouri, because that executive order was being enforced by Missouri militiamen. Another detail to add into all this, right? The Mormons, all their stuff had been stolen because the Twin Cities were ransacked, right, by the Missouri militias, and that was all their property: their clothing, their rugs, their food stores, their hogs, and their cattle had been shot in the streets, and some of them had been taken by the militia who had ransacked the cities, but most of them were just left rotting in the streets. The Mormons were completely destitute, and the Missouri militia basically said, in order to pay for all of the militia coming out here and having to fight against you, we're going to take your property as payment for all of it, right? As part of the legal expenses for this.
I mean, when you think about it, it's a miracle they survived that migration. Yeah, every single migration they had was traumatic and just pathetic. Yeah.
And if anything, it also reinforces the concept of generational trauma. Mormons are incredibly cohesive and tribalistic and very black and white thinking. And that's because the generational trauma that is, part and parcel with this persecution narrative has been taught to them from day one. I remember being a 6-7-year-old kid learning about Hans Mill Massacre, not learning any of the details that led to it, but hearing that our people were murdered by the government because of what they believed. That trauma is reinforced by missionaries, by members in the church, by people who are converted to the church and then convert others. That trauma is reinforced generationally.
And something just occurred to me as you were saying that. We see the exact same thing happen in early Christianity. The period of persecution was where you get the hammers that temper the steel and gets the cohesiveness, gets the binds them into a tribe, as you say. And Mormonism is clearly almost an ethnicity unto itself now, because it became a tribe.
In that vein, quick snip that you bring up there, David, which I love referring back to early Christianity. Just one theory, not sure if this is accurate or true, open to the idea of Jesus being a possible historical rebel figure, right? This is an option, even though mythicism is what you write about extensively in your book. If there was a guy, he probably wasn't a good Roman citizen or buddy of Rome. He may have been this guy, something like a Joseph Smith, if you will, of a Jewish cult. And here you have the Romans trying to extinguish these guys. And here we have, if you were to utilize, just throwing it out there, if you were to utilize Crestus, these stings, right? And you said, well, why are they getting kicked out of, kicked out of Rome? Well, why are all the Jews being taken? Why the fires, all these things. And so it's an interesting idea to speculate.
Right. And again, that's a whole other ball of wax, because I don't think that was the case with early Christianity. But I was thinking about how the myth of persecution, how the early church cherished this false history, and like it's not just in all religions, but all countries can do it too. It's like George Washington could never tell a lie, and and the Pilgrims came here for freedom and made friends with the Indians. Our countries and our institutions and our religions are all built on these founding myths, and when you look at them, you can see that, oh yeah, there's a little more to it than that.
Great point. Great point. I just want to add to that, and then I'll let Bryce continue the story. This is great. In light of what you said, there is an interesting hypothesis by my buddy James Stevens Valiant, which I've got Richard Carrier reading his book Creating Christ. He thinks that a lot of there were like Jewish rebels, and obviously you see what happened in 70 AD. You see what took place.
Yeah.
So what he says is he says the Christians kind of hijacked, if you will, this what was happening to Jewish people who were obviously the best way I can put it is this. Do you think, watching this show so far, that Joseph Smith and the Mormons deserve what they have coming to them? Part of me says they kind of walked into this, right? At the same time, they're using what they walked into as a mythology to make it like their own mythology. And so the Myth of Persecution, Candida Moss, you must read that if you're interested in finding out how bogus the claims are. I did a recent show on this too, on MythVision, how all these claims of and they tried to fillet his skin, but the knives couldn't cut it, or they tried to burn him alive, but he couldn't catch fire. Like it's all hocus pocus.
Yeah. And even some of the quote historical accounts of Christian martyrdom turn out I've been ripped off from earlier stories of other groups like Jews being martyred, so the once again, the irony just continues to dogpile on each other. But yeah, we're getting well afield. We are.
Well, no. To bring it all back, like this is one of the reasons I started off this, this treatise by saying there are lessons within early Mormonism that transcend just Mormon history, right? That there are human lessons, there are human elements that we can tease apart and pick at and look at in a much broader swath, and use Mormonism as basically a case study, cohesion, and what tribal thinking and what persecution does. And I want to bring up, what you said, David, when I interviewed you on Naked Mormonism. Persecution is like fertilizer. There's just the right amount of it, and a religion can't help but grow. And this was a viciously traumatic experience that the Mormon sect needed to grow, to fuel that persecution narrative, because every single one of Joseph Smith's sermons from this point forward talks about Missouri. And it became a central figure of his political attacks, and became the place where he would begin his military expedition, burning across the nation, right? Like, Joseph Smith learned a lot from Missouri, but most importantly, he learned that he could take the trauma that he caused the Mormons to experience and wrap it into his persecution narrative and get a lot of shit done with that persecution narrative. So,
parlay is something you could use. Yeah.
Yes.
What a magnificent bastard.
Right. So Joseph Smith and his buddies are locked away in Missouri jails. He told people like General Lyman White, get the hell out of Missouri. Because if they found out that you participated in the Battle of Crooked River, you're dead. He entertained pretensions that he could get out of this, but he knew that there were some things that he had done, or that his boys had done, that if the Missouri state got a hold of them, they were dead for treason. So he told a number of guys to get out.
And rightfully so, yeah.
Yeah, and most of the apostles as well.
Yeah.
So Joseph Smith is locked in jail, and here Brigham Young once again shows his usefulness, because now Joe and the leadership, the people that all the Mormons trust, there's thousands of Mormons. There's like 5,000-6,000 Mormons at this time. They're all in jail. They're all facing the barrel of treason and arson and robbery and murder. These guys could very well be executed. Somebody's got to coordinate getting those 6,000-7,000 bodies across a state line. That's where Brigham Young steps in. Because Thomas Marsh was president of the Quorum of Apostles, Thomas Marsh defected. He was one of the people who filed an affidavit and gave it to Lilburn Boggs, and Lilburn Boggs was like, holy crap, get him out of here. And he signed, or he wrote the Mormon extermination order in response to the affidavit that Marsh filed. Marsh was president of the Quorum of Apostles. So with him defected, And remaining in Missouri, Brigham Young steps up to the mantle as president of the Quorum of Apostles. And he uses that mantle, he uses that office to coordinate the next Mormon exodus from Missouri to a little town called Quincy, Illinois. Now, Illinois, okay, so people across the nation have been paying attention to the Missouri Mormon War. It gained a lot of headlines. It sold a lot of papers, right? And that has its own kind of weird effects. Illinois was a northern Whig state. And they viewed Missouri, rightfully so, as the backwards slaveholding Democrat, Southern Jacksonian mobocrat state that it was. And largely the citizens of Illinois were receptive to the plight of the Mormons,
especially after news of Hans Mill massacre.
Especially, yes, yeah,
a real propaganda victory for them. Turning lemons into lemonade, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So the citizens in Illinois, including the governor, Thomas Carlin of Illinois, began to see the Mormons as they were religious refugees, for lack of a better term.
And this crowd was as destitute as they come. I'm amazed they even made it to Illinois.
It was a hard winter. Let's just say it's a hard winter, right? Like my great grandma's journal, Patience Delilah Pierce, she talks about how horrible this was. It was vicious. It was cold. It was waiting until the river was frozen over enough so they could cross. It was ferrying Mormon families with the few provisions that they could carry out of town across the Mississippi to Quincy. And then, as soon as they got off of the ferry in Quincy, you set up a shack, you hang up a tarp, you grab some logs and make a lean-to, right? And this is the dead of winter. This is
not
a
all of them
horrible
gonna
time.
make it. Not all of them made it.
Dozens of people died, hundreds of children died in all of this. This was a vicious and ugly time. It really, there's no getting around that. This is horrible. And if we want to lay blame, like Joseph Smith is responsible for this, Governor Boggs is responsible for this, everybody bears blame. Nobody has clean hands in all of this. It's an ugly, disgusting time of American history. And really, it shows one of the reasons why Mormons, by and large, as a population, are much more sympathetic to the plight of immigrants than like evangelical Christians. Mormons are much less interested in building a wall and kicking out asylum seekers because of their own unique history as a peculiar people, because they know about this. Most Mormons know about Liberty Jail and about the Hans Mill massacre and about the Mormon extermination order and being forced to resettle in Illinois. They know about this history. And that's part of the cultural identity of Mormonism. That's why I call myself a cultural Mormon, because this is built into my DNA.
Is it fair to say they know the propagandized version that kind of makes them painted as the good guys the whole way through? However, they still experience the same, like, even if I started the fight with the pit bull and the pit bull bit me, they know about the bite from the pit bull. Right. They don't necessarily care about or acknowledge the details of, I was poking the pit bull stick. You know what I mean?
That gets lost in the details. But the fact is, they pay for this with their blood. It's a very real trauma that they've endured.
That's a great...
Even though lies are what prompted it, they still had to really suffer and really go through an actual thing.
That's a great point, just so that we can get back on track. And for our audience that's wanting to know, like me, they're moving from state to state. They are in an exodus. They are going from Missouri to this little town, and Joseph Smith and other prophets are in prison in Missouri right now. Is he in communication, writing letters to the new president of what is his, how can I not remember?
It's not even that organized at this point. Yeah.
Okay. Are they communicating?
Brigham Young. Yeah. So a lot of communications are going out. Joseph Smith has constant visitors and messengers who are carrying messages to and from the Mormons in Liberty Jail. And I want to speak really quickly to what you were saying earlier, both you, Derek, and David. The most effective propaganda is 9/10 true. Right. You take all of these stories and you tell just an almost perfectly true version of it. And then you add a little slant to it, and people will die. They will go to their graves believing this stuff. Right.
Yes, and they did, and they do.
They
Yeah.
absolutely did, and they do. So Joseph Smith and the leadership are locked up in Liberty Jail. The Mormon exodus is happening under the guiding hand of Brigham Young, as well as Joe's uncle, Uncle John Smith. At this time, Joseph's parents are also making the trip across. His younger brothers and the rest of his family members are making the trip, and this is a very ugly time. Lucy Mack Smith talks about this a lot in her memoir, Biographical Sketches of the Prophet Joseph Smith. There are no good stories that come out of this. This is a very ugly and distressing time of Mormon history. So in all of this, right, the Mormons are beginning their resettlement. Certain opportunists see this as a great place to utilize the plight of the Mormons for their own selfish ends. And Brigham Young is one of these people who was genuinely helping the Mormons, but he was also consolidating his own power, getting the Mormons on his side. Right. But there were non-Mormons who saw the plight of these religious refugees fleeing into Illinois as a great opportunity, because Illinois, from the Panic of 1837, the state of Illinois was in a massive slump. So Carlin sees a bunch of religious refugees coming into his state, and he sees economic opportunities. They can begin to settle cities on the banks of the Mississippi in completely unsettled territory, or territory that's recently been freed up because of the Indian Removal Act, and that's going to bring an economic boom to his state. That's going to look really good for his reelection. Also, land speculators jump into the fray, and there was an area that had been in Iowa territory, right? So we have, I'm going to pull up a very brief map and show this. Because I want to show you kind of the general geography of what we're looking at here. It's going to take me just a second. I'm sorry about this. Okay, so let me grab my screen share. I am sorry, viewers. Here we go. This is Nauvoo. And this is where the Mormons begin settling. This is the Mississippi River. Here is Nauvoo, right? So if we zoom out a little bit, right, we have where the Mormons initially landed was in Quincy, right? Here is Quincy. Nauvoo is eventually where they will settle, but here is the little town of Quincy. They came up from Fayette and from Boonville, from all of these cities here in Missouri, and they came up all the way north and across the Mississippi River right here at Quincy, Illinois. So this town is a non-Mormon settlement, and they are overrun by thousands of Mormon refugees. But what we have across the river is the Iowa Territory. And this is not a state yet. This is just the Iowa Territory, right? Illinois, at this time, Chicago was growing. Chicago had about 3,000 residents. It was not quite a burgeoning industrialized city quite yet. It was in the process of that. But Iowa was still a territory. Mississippi was about 20,000. Sorry, need me to go back? So this is Iowa. This is a territory at this point, right? And in this space, right along here, the Mississippi River in Iowa was what was known as the half-breed tract. Yes, half-breed tract. It's an incredibly racist name for a plot of land. But essentially what it was is an area that was opened up because of the Indian Removal Act, that the government had land that they were selling to people. And this land was initially designated as land that was paid out to veterans. So you would fight in the Black Hawk War or the War of 1812, and you would get 100 acres on this half-breed tract. Well, a court ruling in 1836 basically opened up that whole area for land speculators to go in, buy up the deeds from the original veterans who were granted the land and sell it. So they would, buy 100 acres from 10 different veterans and then consolidate all that property into one deed and then sell that entire deed of, 500 acres. So there were entire companies, including the New York Land Company, I believe. There were a couple of companies that traded in all of this land. So we get all of this territory that's opened up, and we get Joseph Smith and the Mormons, who are just so very destitute in Quincy. And the city of Quincy was a small city, and they now have a massive refugee crisis on their hands that's larger than even the number of citizens who are living there before the Mormons got there. So the Quincy citizens are like, hey, Mormons, we love you. You're awesome. Thanks for doing all this work, and thanks for helping us, and thanks for building all of these buildings for yourself and for us. Let's get you your own place. Exactly. We need you to move out of the basement. All right.
Yeah, exactly. Fortunate, kindly Illinois gentlemen have deeds for them.
That's right. That's right. So this introduces all of the land speculators are like, hey, holy crap. It really sucks. Yeah. I mean, all these people are sick and dying. They don't have enough food to survive. They're eating less than, the prisoners at Auschwitz were every day. Like they are incredibly destitute. I can make a lot of money here off these poor people. So we have Isaac Galland and this guy, Mr. White, and a few other people who are, landowners in this area who are like, hey, Brigham Young, I got a fancy plot of land. Why don't you come have a meeting with me? So while Brigham Young is handling all of the affairs of the Mormons settling and this Mormon exodus, he's also meeting with all these land speculators and determining plots that the Mormons should buy on credit. And all of these land speculators are like, hey, just sign the piece of paper, start settling, and we'll deal with the finances later. It'll be fine. It's all good.
Yep.
So Joseph Smith is also still in Liberty Jail getting letters, all of these letters of like, hey, what are we going to do? Where are we going to settle? How are we going to handle all this? We don't have any money. What do we do with all this? And Joseph was basically like, don't do anything until I can get there, which is bonkers to say because he's facing charges of treason and murder and arson. There's nothing guaranteeing that he's going to get out at any time. He's probably going to be sentenced to the gallows for this.
And you gotta admit, it would be crazy for him to get out of that mess. How does he get out of that crazy mess?
Well, with the help of his good friend General Donovan, Alexander Donovan, coordinates.
Yeah, we said 4 months later of him being in jail.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so in April of 1839, Alexander Donovan was able to negotiate a transfer of venue.
Wait! Stop! I gotta stop you here. Because you're giving the backstory. You're burying the lead. What happened was he has a miraculous jailbreak.
Because, yeah. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, he the guard who was guarding him got drunk one night, and they were all able to slip away and join a caravan of Mormons. Total getaway.
Not quite. Okay, so Alexander Donovan, probably with the understanding that an escape attempt is being plotted here, negotiates a change of venue to Boone County instead of Ray County. And during the journey of transferring the prisoners, probably with the understanding that there's an escape attempt being plotted, negotiates a transfer of venue from Ray County to Boone County. And during the transfer of the prisoners, Joseph Smith talks sweet on one of the guards and says, hey, I got $500 and 2 barrels of whiskey if you let us go. And the guy was like, okay. And lets them all go. And they all flee. Now, notably, there's a disconnect because there's the government of Missouri and then there are the citizens. The government of Missouri had made mistake after mistake after mistake, especially at the hands of Lilburn Boggs, right? He botched the handling of all of this. But the Missouri citizens, they hated the Mormons. They wanted to be done and over with the Mormon problem. Granted, the Mormons had been removed from their state. It was in the process of happening at this time, but they wanted to see Joseph Smith burn.
Right.
They wanted to see justice served.
So you got one hand, they want a hanging trial. The other one just wants to get them out of there. Him and the government for that.
But
I just missed what you said there, David.
Oh.
Repeat that whole thing.
It's amazing, wonderful, fortuitous timing that he managed to escape just at a time when it was good for the government and for him. I guess it was a divine miracle.
Yeah, divine. Yeah, whiskeys bring about many miracles. But
True.
it's notable that the Missouri citizens took vengeance on the guards. William Bowman, he was dragged by his hair across the town square, and Sheriff Morgan was dragged behind a horse by an iron bar and later died from his injuries.
Yikes.
Right, so the Missouri citizens wanted vengeance to be served on the prisoners, and the dudes who let him go became the victims of vigilante justice. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
But
such as the things that these miracles are made of is a little greed, bad timing, and bad planning, bad thinking out. You're not quite thinking out all the way through. Yeah.
So I know we only got a couple minutes left, so let's wrap together a couple of story threads here, and set us on the path for the next time we get together here. Right. So Joseph Smith escapes from jail along with his buddies. He gets to Quincy and he sees the state of the Mormons. Sickness is ravaging the communities. He gets okay. So I want to wrap together a few threads to kind of tie everything together today and set us on the path for the next time we get together. Joseph Smith gets out of Liberty Jail, along with all of his co-leaders. The rest of the leadership was able to escape or, get writs of habeas corpus granted or whatever. And by July of 1839, all of the leadership is out of Missouri and in Quincy. But Joe gets there in April of 1839, and he sees the Mormons are screwed. They are sick. They are starving. They don't have any land. It is April, and people don't even have land to begin planting crops, let alone have, crops to. Like, the economics of wartime really come into play here, right? Like, if you're a leader of a few thousand people, you got to feed them all. So a lot of people are seeing that Joseph Smith's responsible for all of this, right? And the Mormons as a people are also collectively very deeply in debt to the state of Missouri, because they were on the hook for all of the costs of the Missouri militia being out there and having to fight them, right? Somebody was going to bear the expenses for all of those militias. And that fell on the Mormons. So they're not moving out with any property. They don't have any equity to begin with. Most of the land that they settled on and improved for the past 5 years was now just absorbed by the state for committing treason.
Most of the land that they
most of the land that they had settled, over the past 5 years from 1833 to 1838, was just absorbed into the state of Missouri. Graces of the citizens of Illinois to help them hopefully begin a settlement. And now they are open to all sorts of opportunists and land speculators who are looking to make a quick buck off of these people who are in the throes of suffering. That Joe now has to figure out how to feed them all, how to settle them all, and what to do to get his people on the path towards surviving, but not only surviving, but thriving. So
I see good things happening to the young, spunky Mormons.
Good things are coming. Good things are coming. Joseph Smith, once he gets to Quincy, he starts meeting with a bunch of the land speculators and just signing contracts. Just any piece of paper somebody will throw in front of him, he'll sign it, just to get his people. He'll deal with the finances later. It doesn't matter, as long as the people have plots of land to plant crops and to be able to survive the very next winter. He's going forward with it.
And what could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong?
No. There's a couple more points before we get to what could go wrong. He also takes Brigham Young and all of his apostles, his remaining loyal apostles, and he says, guys, we need new members. We need a whole bunch of new Mormons that are going to bring in new tithing money so we can pay for all the land contracts that I'm signing. But we got a real bad reputation here in America, so we're sending you all to Europe.
Yep.
Send them all to Europe. And to alleviate the immediate money problems,
Yeah.
Joseph Smith gathers together hundreds of Mormons who all file affidavits, and he collects all of that information, and including himself and his brother Hiram, they all file affidavits that are listed out, itemized charges to the federal government, asking for $1.2 million in a government bailout.
In 1800s money,
which is like $38 million today, right? Yeah. In 2020 money. And he says, I'm going to DC to meet with the president.
Okay. Yeah, there's no way. You can't even keep talking. You got to just.
Smith goes to Washington.
Okay, this is crazy. So you guys hear this. This is definitely getting, every time you think, yep, it's over. It's over. Boom, something happens. And here we are again. Who knows what kind of ending will come of this? I mean, for me as a recovering addict, for example, I'd have my run. I'd get a year in being high on drugs, and then boom, I get a charge or something happens. And then, all right, I get clean for a while. I learn my lesson. I'm going to stay clean and walk the straight and narrow. And then the next,
sure.
It's worse the next time I relapse, right? And then it's like, oh crap, I did worse this time. This seems to be the pattern of Joseph Smith. It just gets worse and worse to get themselves out of the trouble more and more. And so we are going to be seeing some crazy stuff. If you're watching this and you like this, of course, like the video, but go down in the description. Help David Fitzgerald, help Bryce Blankenagle, the Naked Mormonism podcast, the Heretics Guide to Mormonism, really, or no, the Heretics Guide and Early Mormonism. Am I getting this wrong?
You're close. The Complete Heretics Guide to Western Religion.
There you go.
Book 1, The Mormons.
The Mormons. And this is something that Bryce read of yours years ago. And you know, coming out of Mormonism, and here he is with his own podcast going into this stuff in detail as well, using your book, of course, and many other sources as well. So
the student has surpassed the master big time.
Bryce, go ahead, brother.
That was ever true.
Well, that means a lot to hear from you, David. Thank you. I want to just let viewers know, right? We have now gotten through the somewhat entertaining portion of Mormon history. Where we started with the New York era, that was the boring stuff. The Kirtland era is like the fun, campy, wacky, experimental era. The Missouri era is the militant, like, oh, this shit's for real era of Mormon history. We're beginning to break into the Nauvoo era. And as a quick point of information, and Derek, you're going to have to be pretty judicious on this because it's going to get a lot harder to rein us in going forward. On my podcast, I episodes 1 through 50 cover New York to Missouri. They cover that entire, like 33 year period. Episodes 51 to 224 cover Nauvoo, right? Because it gets so much more complicated, so much more vast, so much more intense. And no longer are we just playing around with leaderships of the members of the leadership. We're playing with like governors of the state and the president of the United States and nationally syndicated newspaper agencies. We're talking about when we break into Nauvoo, that's when Mormonism becomes a facet of American history and religious history that has worldwide implications. So all I can say is, Derek, good luck keeping us on track in the Nauvoo era.
On the plus side, this is also the juiciest, sexiest period of Mormon history. Sexy violence, violent sex, everything happens once we get to the Nauvoo era. So stay tuned. Everything we love about Mormonism is coming to full fruition.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it from the horse's mouth. I can't wait to see what comes of this. I hope you guys say your prayers to whoever the gods you look at for me, because I'm going to need your help in reeling these guys in and keeping them on track. I really do appreciate you guys tuning in, and thank you guys for unloading your information, this knowledge. This is such information that I think anyone who's ever been religious should know. I know this is educating, entertaining, and it's only going to get better, crazier, more bloodshed, more marriages from one man and many women, and all sorts of crazy stuff's coming. So stay tuned and go check out the description. And if you've forgotten already, I hope you stop forgetting. How could you? We are MythVision.